By the time Keller found me, I was on my knees in black water with both hands pressed over my ears hard enough to hurt. It didn't help. The voices were still getting through. Not around me, not echoing off limestone. Through me. Some of them were begging. Some were calm. One was laughing in a way that sounded too much like the volunteer we'd lost an hour earlier. One voice kept repeating my own full name in the tone my mother used when I was a kid and had wandered too far in a grocery store. Another one, low and patient, said the same sentence over and over. You answered me before. You can answer me again. My helmet light was pointed at the chamber wall, and the wall was moving. Not physically. Not like a collapse. The mineral sheen across the rock carried faces the way a window carries reflections. Eyes. Mouths. The shape of words forming under a skin of water and calcite. I saw a woman I recognized from a missing person report dated 1998. I saw a man whose helmet I'd found that afternoon. I saw myself half a second ahead of my own breathing. Keller grabbed my harness and shouted something. I didn't hear him, because then my own voice came back from the dark below the flood line and said, very clearly, leave him. He's with us now. And Keller let go. 3 nights earlier, none of this had happened yet. I had been doing cave rescue for 9 years when the Black Hollow call came in. Most people who heard cave rescue pictured ropes, tight spaces, maybe a panicked hiker with a twisted ankle. Sometimes that was true. A lot of the time it was slower and uglier than that. Mud in your sleeves. Cold water finding the gap at the back of your neck. Standing in one spot for 40 minutes because the person in front of you was trying to get a stretcher around a bend that had looked wider on paper. I was good at it. That wasn't false modesty or bragging. I knew how to keep my breathing steady in a squeeze. I knew how to build a patient package underground without wasting movement. I knew when to move fast and when fast got people killed. That last part mattered to me more than it used to. 7 years earlier, in a lava tube east of Bend, a junior rescuer named Colin Voss had told me a side passage sounded wrong. That was how he phrased it. Not unstable. Not ready to fail. Just wrong. He was 22, still trying to sound like he belonged there, and I overruled him because the patient was crashing and because I had been right a lot before then. The collapse killed Colin and a volunteer EMT named Grace Nunez. The report called it a secondary structural failure under emergency conditions. That was the kind version. The truth was I had made the call, and 2 people had died inside it. Nobody could prove negligence. Rock shifted, caves failed, bad luck existed. I kept my certifications. I kept getting deployed. I learned how to talk about that night in clean, official language. I never learned how to think about it without hearing Colin say, "This passage sounds wrong." Black Hollow sat 3 hours north of Portland in a stretch of forest that looked ordinary from the road. Brown sign, gravel lot, little visitor kiosk with sun-faded photos of stalactites. The public entrance fed into a guided tour route with railings and fixed lights. Below that there were research corridors where hydrology teams monitored seasonal flooding. Below that, through locked gates and old service cuts, there were mining tunnels abandoned long before modern mapping standards meant anything. Over time, the systems had connected in ways nobody originally meant them to. Tour cave, karst cave, mine workings, sink channels, flooded chimneys. Black Hollow wasn't one cave. It was a neighborhood with shared plumbing. The call was for a missing geology grad student named Nora Bell, 24, last seen with the survey team 16 hours earlier. One teammate had made it back to the upper research station in shock, hypothermic, and not especially useful. He kept saying Nora had heard someone in the lower channels and gone after them. That should have sounded like enough of a warning on its own. When I reached base camp, people were moving with the controlled urgency I recognized from every real search. Tables under canopies, pelican cases open, wet ropes coiled in blue bins. Someone had taped laminated sector maps to a folding board, though half the markings had been crossed out and redrawn in grease pencil. The coordinator was a man in his 60s named Keller. Lean, gray beard cut short, white helmet with an old rescue decal almost peeled off. He had the posture of somebody who conserved words on purpose. "You're Mercer," he said. I nodded. He looked at me for a second longer than necessary. "Stay with Team 2. Flood route access only. If anything changes, I want updates before movement. That was all. No special briefing. No local superstition. No warning that Black Hollow had its own rules besides the usual ones. Don't rush. Don't split. Don't assume the map is right just because it's printed. We entered through a maintenance hatch behind the tourist route. The upper passages were familiar cave country, pretty in the cheap, public sense. Railed walkway, LED uplights washed over columns. Signage about mineral formations and bat habitats. Then a steel gate, a keypad, and the end of the civilized version of underground. Below that, Black Hollow started feeling used. Extension cords zip-tied to anchors. Survey flags. Old drill marks. The ghost of diesel from machinery long removed. The rock changed too. The upper limestone had that rounded, dissolved look. Deeper down, the walls got harsher where the mine cuts bit across natural passage. You could see old labor in straight lines that didn't belong there. Team 2 was me, a rope tech named Owen Park, medic Tam Nguyen, and a local volunteer, Jesse Rule, who knew the lower research sectors better than the rest of us. Nora's last known position was somewhere near a flooded branch called the East Siphon Annex, which sounded less like a place people should work and more like something an insurance lawyer had named after the fact. We passed the flood line 20 minutes in. It was marked by a band of mineral staining on the walls and a row of waist-high bolts driven into the rock, each capped with old orange paint. Above that line, the passages flooded seasonally. Below it, during wet months, parts of the system could fill fast enough to erase you. I noted it because of course I did, but it didn't mean anything else to me then. In the annex, the water rose to mid-calf and sucked at our boots. My dry glove seal on the left wrist had a tiny tear, and cold seeped in every time I steadied myself against the wall. We were moving light discipline, checking side cuts, calling Nora's name at intervals. That was the other thing about search work people got wrong. It wasn't dramatic most of the time. It was repetition. Nora Bell. This is rescue. Call out. Then listening. Then doing it again around the next bend. We came to a split where the main passage kept left and a narrower flooded slot pinched right. Jesse said Nora's teammate thought she'd headed toward the slot. I angled my light into it. The beam hit black water, slick stone, and a pale shape too far back to identify. Then I heard a woman's voice, hoarse and frightened. Ethan? I stopped cold. Nobody on that team should have known my first name. I hadn't introduced myself underground. Please, the voice said, barely louder than the water. I'm stuck, Owen muttered. You hear that? I did. So did Tam, going by the way she turned her helmet toward me. I didn't think. That was the truth. If I'd thought, maybe I would have noticed the way the voice sounded close without caring. Maybe I would have asked how Nora knew my name. Maybe I would have felt that old flare of shame that always came before I overcommit to a bad call. Instead I crouched toward the slot and said, Hold on. We're coming. The voice cut off so fast it was like someone had closed a door on it. Not faded. Not moved away. Stopped. We searched that branch for another 40 minutes. The pale shape turned out to be a broken sample bucket. No patient. No Nora. No fresh tracks that stayed readable in the water. On the walk back, Jessie kept glancing at me and then looking away. I assumed she was wondering the same thing I was. How had Nora known my name? At base camp, I peeled off my gloves and found Keller at the map board. He asked for our report without looking up, and I gave it in the usual order. Route searched. Hazards noted. No patient contact. Possible voice heard in right side flooded slot. His head came up. Possible what? A voice, I said. Female. Sounded like Belle. Keller stared at me. What did it say? The whole tent had gone quiet by then. Even people pretending to inventory gear were listening. I said, It asked for help. That's not what I asked. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. It said my name. Then it said it was stuck. Keller's face lost color in a way I had only seen on scene when someone was trying not to show panic in front of a team. And what? He said carefully. Did you say back? There are moments when you know the room has moved ahead of you and you're the last person to understand why. I looked from Keller to Jesse to Owen, and I saw it in all of them at once. Not confusion. Recognition. I said. I told it we were coming. Keller shut his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he looked tired in a very old way. You should have been briefed before entry, he said, more to himself than to me. Then louder, listen carefully. Because there is one rule in Black Hollow and you've already broken it. Nobody spoke. Keller said, never answer a voice that calls your name below the floodline. And every person in that tent looked at me the way people look at a man they expect not to see tomorrow. I didn't vanish that night. That seemed to bother people more than if I had. If you told a room full of cave people there was a local rule about not answering voices underground, most of them would assume you were talking about acoustics, stress, suggestion, maybe one half-serious superstition built around a real hazard. That was more or less where my head went at first. I'd broken some local taboo, everybody was spooked, and by morning we'd all feel embarrassed about how dramatic it had gotten. Morning came. Nobody felt embarrassed. I slept in a heated trailer next to the gear shed and woke twice from dreams I forgot immediately. Not nightmares in the usual sense. More like I had been in the middle of a long conversation and somebody had yanked the cord from the phone. At briefing, Keller reassigned everyone without comment and moved me from Team 2 to a smaller push group going back into the lower research corridors. Owen asked if that was wise. Keller told him to worry about rigging, not folklore. He said it flat, but he watched me the entire time. The odd part started before we were 40 minutes underground. A ceiling flake the size of a dinner tray came loose in a constriction just after I cleared it, hitting the spot where my shoulder had been. Later, in a mine crosscut with rotten timber, Keller halted us because he smelled bad air. We backed up 10 yards, and one of the supports failed with a crack that folded the floor where I'd been about to step. In the east ladder well, my primary lamp flickered once, then stabilized, while Jessie's failed completely and left her swearing in the dark until Tam handed her a spare. Individually, none of that meant much. Underground, things failed. Ground settled. Batteries lied. But a pattern forms faster in a place where people already expect one. By the end of that shift, nobody would walk directly behind me. We still hadn't found Nora Bell. What we did find were signs that bothered me more the longer I sat with them. Fresh scuffing in places that weren't on the search plan. A survey marker tied in a knot I didn't recognize. A squeeze at the end of a narrow crawl that opened into clean air where the map showed solid wall. When I said I didn't remember that opening from the chart review, Jessie told me it wasn't on the chart. I thought she was joking until she spread the waterproof map on a dry ledge and showed me. The opening I had just crawled through was real. We had all used it. But the printed line work showed unbroken rock there. We can note it later, Keller said. He said it too fast. Back at camp, I found him near the generator bank smoking half a cigarette down to the filter. You knew more than you told me, I said. He kept his eyes on the tree line. Yes. That voice knew my name. Yes. And you sent me back in. He crushed the cigarette under his boot. Also yes. I wanted to be angrier than I was. Mostly I felt the slow, familiar dread of realizing I had walked into a bad system that everybody else had already decided to live with. What happens to people who answer? I asked. Keller took a while before responding. Usually they disappear. Usually. A few come back first. Come back how? He looked at me then. Different. That was the kind of answer designed to make itself larger in your head after midnight. I spent that evening in the records trailer under the excuse of updating route notes. Black Hollow kept maps in layers. Public routes, research sectors, hydrology overlays, old mine surveys scanned from paper originals. The deeper I went into the files, the less the cave agreed with itself. Passage labels changed between decades. Entire branches appeared and vanished depending on which year I opened. Some could be explained by flooding or collapsed access. Some could not. The worst part was seeing places I knew I had entered that day simply not represented anywhere official. At 11:30 p.m., I printed 3 maps from different years and taped them side by side. There should have been enough overlap to reconcile the lower east branches. Instead there were holes, not blank spots, avoidances, like every cartographer had gotten near the same area and chosen, independently or not, to stop being specific. Jessie found me there and stood in the doorway with a cup of instant coffee she didn't seem interested in drinking. "You shouldn't stay up with those," she said. "With maps. With those maps." I almost laughed, but she was serious. Jessie was in her early 30s, compact, practical, one of those local volunteers who knew every locked gate and unofficial trailhead within 50 miles. She had the habit of talking with one hand tucked through her harness belt even when she wasn't underground. "What exactly do you think is happening here?" I asked. She shifted her weight. "I think Black Hollow is old enough to have habits." "That's not an answer. It's the only one people keep surviving." I asked her how long she'd known about the rule. "Since my first season. Everybody local learns it." She looked at the maps. "You really weren't told?" "No. That should have been Keller. That's what he said." She nodded once, as if that confirmed something she already suspected. "Then he wanted to see what would happen." That sat between us for a second. "You say people disappear," I said. "But I'm still here." Jessie finally took a sip of the coffee, grimaced at it, and set it down. That's the part making everyone nervous. Because it wasn't just that I was still here. Things had started bending away from me. Not in some cinematic, obvious way. In small operational ways. My rope bag would end up nearest the right hatch. A route choice I argued for would dodge a flooded dead end nobody expected. When a pulley pin went missing from our litter rig, I found it under my own boot like it had been placed there. Once, in a side chamber below the floodline, I stopped for no reason I could explain and told Owen to hold position. He gave me an ugly look but did it. 5 seconds later, a slab of flowstone peeled off the wall ahead and shattered across the exact stretch of passage where we would have been. Nobody thanked me. Nobody talked to me for the next 10 minutes either. By the second night, rumors were moving faster than the search. Some said the cave had marked me. Some said it was keeping me alive because it needed something. One volunteer from the county team refused to enter if I was assigned to his sector. He told Tam this where he thought I couldn't hear, and Tam told him to either zip his suit or go home. I appreciated that more than I said. Nora's surviving teammate, a graduate assistant named Leon Hart, was stable enough to interview by then. I listened through the trailer wall while Keller questioned him. Leon kept circling the same point. Nora heard someone below the water route calling from a place that shouldn't have been accessible. She said it sounded like her older sister who was alive and in Seattle. Leon told her not to answer. Nora told him to stop acting crazy. Then, according to Leon, she said, "Nora, wait," in her own voice, like she was repeating something somebody else had just said to her. After that, she walked away from him into the dark. When Keller came out, he saw me standing there and didn't look surprised. "You collect stories like that from every incident?" I asked. "Most. And still nobody shuts the cave down." He gave me a tired smile that had nothing warm in it. "You think closure solves appetite?" That was the first time I understood Keller's worldview had gone somewhere extreme a long time ago and never come back. I slept badly again. Around 3 in the morning, I woke certain someone had said my name beside the bunk. The trailer was empty. I sat up, listened, and heard only the generator hum and rain tapping the metal roof. Then I noticed my boots were not where I'd left them. They were neatly placed beside the door, toes pointed outward, like somebody preparing for a quick exit. I told myself I'd done it half awake earlier. People under stress did stupid, forgettable things all the time. But when I picked them up, there was cave silt on the soles. Fresh, wet, and black. And I had not been underground since the shift ended. On the third day, I stopped expecting anyone to tell me the truth voluntarily and started looking for it where people forgot to scrub. That meant archives. Black Hollow's official records were maintained in a county facility 40 minutes away, but the on-site trailer had decades of duplicate field logs, incident binders, survey notebooks, and the kind of handwritten material organizations never mean to preserve but never quite throw out. Muddy copies, margins full of pencil, old forms stuffed into the wrong folders. The honest leftovers. I told Keller I was off rotation for 6 hours because my left wrist seal needed replacing and because he didn't actually want me near the newest volunteers right then. He didn't argue. That alone told me he preferred me occupied and visible. The incident binders went back to the late 70s. Missing hikers, injured spelunkers, a pair of teenagers who slipped under a bypass gate in 1989. A county deputy in 1996 who went missing during a body recovery. The official language stayed ordinary. Misadventure, exposure, flood event, disorientation in unmapped passages. The inserts were where Black Hollow started talking around the edges. A yellow legal pad sheet tucked inside a 1984 report. If it answers back, leave immediately. A grease pencil note on a route schematic. Below, FL voice contact reported by subject before separation. A typed report with a paragraph physically cut out, then taped back in out of order. Under the tape, in the imprint of the original carbon, I could still make out the sentence. Patient repeated rescuer's exact words before visual contact. Kept going like that. A language of omissions. I found the phrase that stayed with me most in a report from 1972 attached to a mine survey casualty. The main page described a worker who had broken from a team and not returned. On the reverse, in blue ink faded almost gray, somebody had written, "The cave only keeps the people who speak first." I read it 3 times because I wanted it to mean something else. The logic of it made no sense if you treated Black Hollow like a physical hazard. Rockfalls didn't care who spoke first. Rising water didn't wait for conversational cues. But once I accepted that the people writing these notes were describing a pattern instead of a metaphor, a worse thought followed. By every pattern in the file, I should have been gone already. I started cross-referencing names from the reports with recovered equipment logs. That gave me a list of items found without bodies. Helmet from Sector D East. Pack frame recovered near lower gallery. Journal in sealed dry bag from unnamed sump branch. In normal rescue work, personal effects without a patient meant tragedy plus bad luck. Here it started to look curated. Jesse caught me carrying a banker's box of old binders to the folding table and sat down without asking. "You're making the same face people make before they go back down alone," she said. "Then stop me if I head for the hatch." She reached into the box, flipped open a file, and went quiet. "They let you see all this?" "They failed to stop me." That almost got a smile out of her. Almost. One of the dry bag inventories led us to a storage shelf in the back of the gear trailer. Whoever cataloged recovered property had been diligent enough to tag bins, sloppy enough not to lock them. There were 6 bins for Black Hollow. Most contained the usual sad things. Waterlogged gloves, snapped carabiners, notebooks fused into bricks. But bin 4 held items wrapped individually in butcher paper and labeled only with dates. Inside I found a white helmet with a University Rescue sticker melted at one edge by old battery acid. A brass watch stopped at 2:14. A flashlight with teeth marks on the rubber switch cover. On the inside of one hard hat, written in marker where only the wearer would usually see it, was the name Colin. Not Voss. Different Colin, older file. Still, seeing that name underground hit me in the chest like a physical shove. Jessie was reading inventory tags. "These all belong to people who answered," she said. "You say that like you know." "I know because none of the other missing ever leave things in the same places." "What places?" She hesitated. "Collection points." I looked up sharply. "That's not a real term." "It is if you've gone deep enough." That was the first moment I understood Jessie had seen more than she admitted. Not rumor. Not local campfire junk. Direct contact with something operationally important. I unwrapped one last journal from the bottom of the bin. Black cover, paper swollen but legible in the middle where the waterproof bag had held longest. The front page identified the owner as Dina Walsh, Hydrology Tech, 2008. The early entries were normal field notes. Flow rates, temperature, complaint about a broken zipper pull on a dry pouch. Then the writing changed. Shorter lines, less punctuation, same careful handwriting trying not to show panic. Heard father's voice below marker 6. Father deceased 14 years. Did not answer. Voice laughed. Kel says don't let it get a full sentence from you. Then the final page, written so hard the pen had torn the paper. It knows I'm listening now. That wasn't the same as it heard me or it saw me. It was worse. Listening meant participation even without consent. As if attention itself counted. Jessie closed the journal with 2 fingers, like it might be hot. Put it back. Why? Because the longer you hold their stuff, the worse the dreams get. That should have sounded ridiculous. Didn't. Not with those files open and my boots still dirty from a night I didn't remember leaving the trailer. I asked her the question I had been holding since the first briefing. Why haven't I disappeared? Jessie stared at the table a long time. Maybe you already did. I wanted to dismiss that. Instead I thought of the map opening that hadn't existed until we needed it. The cave-ins stepping around me. The way the voice had used my name with no introduction. That afternoon, Keller ordered a search push into a lower branch newly accessible after a water drop. He put me on the team himself. Tam objected. Owen muttered something about bait under his breath. Keller ignored both. The branch was a low, mineral-crusted tunnel ending in a chamber no bigger than a garage. There was no body, no Nora, no obvious sign of recent occupation. What there was, arranged on a dry shelf of stone above the waterline, was a row of personal items placed side by side with almost domestic neatness. 3 helmets, 2 notebooks, a child's plastic wristband from a tourist entry gate, a wedding ring threaded onto survey tape, a folded rescue patch from a county team that had disbanded 15 years earlier. Nobody touched anything. Owen said, "Who the hell put these here?" Keller answered before I could. "We're leaving." He sounded scared for the first time since I met him. On the way out, I lagged half a step and looked back into the chamber. My lamp passed over the items, then the wall behind them. Somebody had scratched lines into the calcite in tight vertical columns. At first I thought they were tally marks. Then I realized they were conversational turns. Short lines, longer ones beneath. Indentations as if different speakers had taken different spaces on the wall. A transcript, maybe, or an attempt at one. Before I could move closer, Keller seized the back of my harness and dragged me forward hard enough to choke me against the chest strap. "Do not linger where it keeps records," he said. I twisted around. He let go. "If I have to explain that word to you this late, then we're already in worse shape than I thought." That night I went through every childhood memory I had of caves and came up mostly blank. That bothered me because I knew there should have been one. Family trip. A tour cave. Me getting lost. I had not thought about it in years. Now, with Black Hollow pressing on every weak place in my head, that old memory started coming back in pieces I hadn't invited. A damp handrail. The smell of coins from a gift shop machine. My mother yelling my name from very far away. And another voice, calm and close in the dark, saying, "No, not that way. Come with me." Memory is unreliable even when nobody is trying to use it against you. That was one of the first things you learned in rescue debriefs after bad incidents. People swapped sequence. Added sounds that made sense afterward. Lost entire minutes under adrenaline. It was one reason I had always distrusted mystical explanations. Human beings were machine shops for false certainty. Still, I knew the difference between inventing a memory and recovering one you had pushed somewhere ugly. The cave trip had happened when I was 9. Family vacation, Oregon coast loop, one inland stop because my father liked geology enough to mistake it for a personality. I remembered the gift shop more clearly than the cave itself. Polished stones in mesh bags, a rack of postcards, a machine that flattened pennies into souvenirs. Then I remembered getting separated. Not dramatically. No cliff edge, no screaming. I had stopped because one of my shoelaces came loose. The tour kept moving. The guide assumed I was with my parents. My parents assumed I was with the guide. By the time somebody noticed, I was alone in a side branch where tourists were not supposed to go. That much had always been the family version. What came back now were details nobody had ever included. The way the darkness there felt layered, like the public lights weren't failing so much as refusing to travel any farther. The cold spot near my knees where water moved under rock. The voice. A man's voice, I thought at first. Then not exactly a man's. Adult, calm, patient in a way that made panic seem childish. It had not sounded threatening. It had sounded helpful, almost amused by how small my problem was. Left foot first. Duck your head there. Good. I remembered obeying it. I remembered feeling very clearly that if I did exactly what the voice said, I would not get hurt. Family lore said a ranger eventually found me near the lower stair and walked me out. My mother used to tell the story at holidays because it ended well and because parents like survival stories where the ending allows them to laugh. The problem was, when I dug into the old visitor records through county archives, there had been no ranger in the cave that day. No staff entry matching my disappearance window. No emergency response notation. Just a tour delay of 18 minutes and a handwritten line on an insurance form. Child located near service return without escort. Without escort. I printed the record and stared at it until the page went soft at the edges. More pieces followed. Not all at once. Enough to keep me off balance. The service return where I had been found connected, years later, to a survey bore that wasn't opened until after a flood shift in 2003. Yet I remembered a narrow passage beyond it. A shelf of dry stone with scratches in the wall. I remembered a shallow pool that reflected light that wasn't there. When I told Tam any of this, it was after a long shift and with the weak understanding that speaking it aloud might make it sound as impossible as it should have. We were in the medic trailer. Tam was rewrapping blistered heels on a volunteer who had worn the wrong socks into a 12-hour search. After he left, she sat back on the bench, peeled off her gloves and said, "I've seen stress do weird things. Meaning you think I'm confabulating. Meaning I think trauma likes to find old doors." It was the nicest possible version of doubt. Tam was smart enough not to overcommit either way. Mid-30s, former ER nurse, the kind of person who could hand you glucose tabs and tell you your emotional life was a mess in the same tone. She hadn't started avoiding me like some of the others had, and that alone made her valuable. I handed her the county record. "Read the last line." She did, then read it again. "That's not good," she said. "No. It also doesn't prove what you think it proves." "What do you think it proves?" She set the paper down carefully. "That whatever is happening now didn't start now." That was probably true. I hated hearing it. Later that day, I cornered Keller by the map board and asked him directly whether Black Hollow had any recorded incidents involving a lost child during a public tour roughly 26 years earlier. He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "You knew," I said. "We keep broader files than the county does." "Did you know it was me?" "Not until I saw your full name on the deployment list." He rubbed one hand over his beard. "Then I hoped it was coincidence." "You hoped wrong." "Yes." I was angrier now. Finally. Not clean anger, because too much of it braided back into my own guilt, but enough to steady me. "So what am I?" I asked. "A repeat customer?" Keller flinched, and that startled me more than anything else he'd done. He was not a man built for visible reactions. "You're someone it remembers," he said. "Why? If I knew that, I wouldn't still be here." That same evening we got the first sign of Nora Bell that felt recent. Not a body. Not even blood. A notebook page torn clean from a field book and pinned under a rock in a crawlspace below the East Annex. The writing matched Nora's confirmed notes from her thesis kit. Contained only 3 lines. "The voice knows things it shouldn't. It knew about Emma before I told it. I think it knew me first." Emma, according to Leon, was Nora's sister. That suggested either impossible information access or a level of prior connection consistent with mine. Owen wanted the page bagged and logged. Keller took one look and sealed the passage for the shift. When we got back to camp, Jessie asked if I noticed what the page had been pinned with. I said I hadn't. She held up a small brass souvenir press coin from a tourist cave gift shop. One of those flattened pennies with a cartoon bat stamped on it. My throat tightened before I understood why. Because when I was 9, my father had given me 2 quarters and a penny at a machine just like that and told me I could keep one souvenir if I stayed close. I did not remember whether I had ever spent them. That night, I stopped pretending the connection might be symbolic. The thing below the flood line either knew my history in detail or had participated in it. I lay awake with the trailer lights off, listening to the rain, and tried to reason through what that meant. Best case, I was dealing with some long-running human mechanism. A hidden party. A pattern of local manipulation. A cult if you wanted to embarrass yourself with the word. Worst case, there was an intelligence under Black Hollow that had encountered me as a child, recognized me decades later, and intervened when I broke the rule. Around 1 in the morning, I heard quiet footsteps outside the trailer. Not random camp movement. Measured. One person. They stopped at my door. I sat up and reached for the flashlight under my pillow. A voice on the other side said, very softly, "Ethan, don't answer." It was my own voice. I stayed still for what felt like 10 full minutes. No second knock. No retreating footsteps. Nothing. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, the gravel was empty. But there was a wet handprint on the metal. Small. Narrow palm. Like a child's. Keller told me the truth only after he ran out of ways to manage me without it. That happened on the 5th day, after a volunteer from Lane County bolted out of a lower corridor claiming he'd heard his wife singing in a passage where our radios wouldn't reach. Tam sedated him. Owen snapped at Jesse for bringing that marked bastard en route with them. Jesse almost punched him. Search operations started looking less like a mission and more like a workplace trying not to admit it had become a superstition cult with helmets. Keller called me into the old orientation room above the public route, a place tourists used to watch safety videos before the park outsourced everything to a tablet kiosk. The room smelled like dust, damp plywood, and stale coffee. The old wall display still showed a cartoon cave map with smiling bats. He closed the door, sat down across from me, and folded his hands. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and you are going to hate me for part of it. I'm already ahead of schedule." That earned a tired breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "I'm not here to protect rescuers," he said. "Not first." I said nothing. My job for the last 19 years has been to monitor exposures, voice contact, behavioral changes, route anomalies, recurrent names. Anyone who answers below the flood line becomes a priority case. Priority for what? Observation. Containment if possible. "You mean abandonment?" His eyes stayed on me. Sometimes. That word landed cleaner than if he'd tried to defend it. He told me about the missing in the files. Not every detail, but enough. Most people who answered were gone within 72 hours. Some wandered off route during active operations. Some returned to camp, slept, and were missing by dawn. A few came back altered first. Quieter. Distracted. Resistant to leaving. Protective of the lower passages in ways that made no practical sense. "How many?" I asked. "Enough. That isn't a number. No. It's what lets me sleep in pieces." He went on before I could push harder. "The organization covers it," he said. "Not with one grand conspiracy. Just the usual way institutions cover things they can't solve. Forms. Language. Cause categories the public already understands. Fall. Flood. Exposure. Poor visibility. It isn't hard. Caves kill people without help. And Nora?" Keller's jaw worked once. If she answered, then Nora Bell was no longer a conventional rescue before we arrived. That sentence made me want to hit him. Maybe because part of me recognized the logic. The same ugly triage instinct rescue work depended on had just been extended into a place I couldn't ethically follow. "So you leave them," I said. "I have abandoned multiple operations, yes? You don't even sound ashamed." He surprised me by looking genuinely offended. "You think shame makes better decisions underground?" "No. I think it proves you remember they were people." He leaned forward. "You listen to me carefully, Ethan. People who answer that voice are not doomed because I say so. They are connected to something that learns them faster than we can retrieve them. I have lost good responders trying to save the already claimed. I have lost civilians who thought compassion outranked procedure. The rule exists because sentiment kills teams. I wanted to call that monstrous. Instead, I thought of Colin Voss telling me a passage sounded wrong and me pushing anyway because urgency felt morally superior to caution. Keller saw something shift in my face. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's why I read your file twice." For a second the room felt smaller. "You used that against me." "I used what made you predictable." There it was. The real reason I had never been briefed in time. Keller had wanted to see whether I would answer. Whether the part of me that always lunged toward the voice in trouble would overrule procedure again. You made me your test case. I made contact with the only person on that deployment who was guaranteed to break the rule if he heard a trapped woman call for help. He said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. I stood so fast the chair legs scraped. If you're trying to confess, work on your tone. Keller didn't move. Sit down. Be angry after I finish. I should have left. I sat. He told me there had been other exceptions. Not many. A handful across decades. People who answered and did not vanish right away. People who seemed, for a time, assisted. Protected from falls. Guided through unmapped sectors. Watched. None lasted. What happened to them? I asked. They either went below on their own and didn't come back, or they stayed topside long enough to become functionally impossible to trust. Meaning, they carried messages. They opened routes. They misdirected teams without always knowing they were doing it. That last part hit me hardest because it was the first one I could map directly onto my own last 3 days. Right route choices. Lucky timings. My boots by the door. The feeling of being nudged without an obvious hand. Keller stood and walked to the old bat poster on the wall like he needed something to look at besides me. The thing below the flood line does not behave like a predator in the simple sense, he said. It attaches. That word again. Through language. That seems to be the doorway. And what if it attached before? I asked. When I was a kid. He turned back. Then this may not be first contact. It may be resumed contact. I laughed at that one short ugly sound. You make it sound like customer service. He didn't smile. I asked him why, if he believed all this, Black Hollow remained open at all. Why the county still ran guided tours above a site he clearly considered contaminated. Because closure is theater, he said. People cut fences. Researchers come with permits. Kids come with flashlights. You can't erase a cave. You can only manage traffic and reduce conversation. There was that word again too. Conversation. He avoided terms like haunting or demon or even entity unless forced. He talked like a man handling a disease vector made of grammar. Before I left, I asked the only question I still cared about. Do you think Nora is alive? Keller answered in a way I hated because it was honest. I think whatever answer I give you will be wrong by the time we act on it. That night I went through the lower gear locker after curfew and found what I had half expected. Demolition charges in a sealed case marked for emergency collapse mitigation. Standard practice in unstable systems. Sometimes you brought down what you couldn't make safe. Attached to the case was an old paper tag in Keller's handwriting. Last resort. Chamber access only. Not if found. Only. Which meant Keller had known about a chamber for some time and had not shared that with any official map. Jessie found me reading the tag. You really are trying to get killed, she said. Maybe not killed. She looked at the charges, then at me. That's worse. I asked her whether she trusted Keller. She thought about it. I trust him to do what he thinks prevents spread. Spread. That's his word. And yours. Jessie glanced toward the dark window where the cave mouth sat somewhere beyond the floodlights and trees. I think he mistakes isolation for morality. Then, after a pause, I also think he's saved more people than he's sacrificed. I just don't know which part of that sentence is supposed to comfort me. Neither did I. By then I had stopped asking whether I was in danger. The real question was whether I had ever been only myself in Black Hollow. The tunnel that changed everything opened after a water drop no one had expected until later in the season. Hydrology logged the level shift at 5:12. By 7 o'clock Keller had a restricted team assembled to inspect what the receding flow had exposed. He did not want me on it. That was obvious from the way he said my name like a diagnosis when I clipped into the line anyway. I'm not asking permission, I told him. No, he said. That's part of the problem. The route branched off a sump bypass in the lower east sectors and entered a section of natural cave the mine crews had barely touched. No drill scars. No old timber. Just raw limestone and water-polished turns that looked too smooth to trust. The air felt warmer there, which was wrong. Caves generally flatten temperature. This place had pockets of heat like breath trapped in cracks. We found the first journal in a dry niche behind a curtain of mineral flow. Plastic crate, cracked lid, field books sealed in vacuum bags, all tagged with university IDs from a research grant 10 years old. Not rescue records, research records. Keller swore under his breath the second he saw them. That interested me. Tam posted at the corridor mouth while Owen checked footing. Jesse and I opened the bags one by one. The lead researcher had been Dr. Miriam Sloan, linguistics cross-listed with acoustic cognition, which was strange enough to silence all of us for a moment. "You brought a linguist into this place?" I asked without looking up. Keller said nothing. The journals explained more in 50 pages than 5 days of official briefings had. The one rule had not originally been written to protect people from the cave. It had been written to protect the cave's occupant from people teaching it too quickly. The early entries were cautious. Reports of anomalous echo behavior, voice source dislocation, unprompted mimicry limited to short phrases. Then a breakthrough, or what the researchers thought was one. They realized response quality improved after direct interaction. Not random sound, conversation, naming, question and answer structures, personal disclosures. Every exchange sharpened the imitation. The later notebooks were worse. Detailed transcriptions of call and response attempts below the floodline, lists of pronouns, emotional terms, kinship words, identity markers. They were trying to teach it language the way you would teach a child or a machine. One margin note, underlined 3 times, read, "Rule revision. No unscripted engagement. It generalizes from intimacy faster than from vocabulary." Another, "It is not luring in the animal sense. It is asking. The danger begins when it learns what kind of answer works on whom." I read that twice, then handed the notebook to Jessie. Her face drained as she scanned the page. "So Keller knew," I said. "He knew enough," she said quietly. The thing below the floodline was not just repeating words. It was modeling people, learning what grief sounded like in a daughter, what authority sounded like in a supervisor, what guilt sounded like in a rescuer who had already failed before. I understood, suddenly and horribly, why it had chosen Nora's sister, why it had chosen my name, why help and protection felt so specifically tuned to me. It wasn't random favor. It was relationship building. We found audio cassettes in a foam case turned brittle with age. No player down there, but labels on the shells gave us enough. Session 4. Identity continuity. Session 9. Self-reference. Session 11. Voluntary return language. Voluntary return. That phrase made my skin crawl more than any mention of disappearances had. Because it implied the researchers had seen people choose the lower passages after contact and decided the language around choice still applied. Keller finally spoke. "Bag everything. We're done here." "No," I said. He looked at me like a man already counting future damage. "Excuse me? The rule doesn't protect us," I said. "It contains it." "Yes. And you let people believe it was a ghost story because that kept them simple." "Yes." Tam, still at the corridor mouth, said, "Can this wait until we're not standing in the conversation pit?" Nobody answered her. I kept reading. Dr. Sloane's final entries were disjointed but lucid enough to terrify me. She believed the phenomenon had no stable physical body in the human sense. It expressed through sound, pressure, reflected surfaces, and eventually internal auditory carryover in exposed subjects. It did not take people in a straightforward way. Rather, sustained communication created a kind of reciprocal embedding. The more a person disclosed, listened, responded, and recognized, the more the boundary between speaker and hearer thinned. In plain English, talk to it long enough and it could continue inside you, which explained the dreams, the misplaced boots, the brief flashes of knowing where to stand before rock failed. It also explained why some of the missing might not have been dragged anywhere. If connection felt like being understood by something vast and attentive in the one place you already feared yourself most, maybe people went willingly. The mimicry got worse as we moved deeper. At first it was distant team chatter in passages where nobody stood. Then Tam heard her own voice ask for a pressure bandage from around a blind corner. Then I heard Owen mutter, in Owen's exact board cadence, "Mercer's right, take the lower notch." Even though Owen was 20 feet behind me saying nothing, every instance was more precise than the last. Keller ordered radio silence except for emergencies. I almost laughed at the futility. The radios weren't the issue. We were. At one point Jessie grabbed my arm so hard her nails bit through my glove and whispered, "Don't repeat anything you hear down here, even as a joke." Why? Because it counts. That matched the research notes. Repetition wasn't neutral. Echoing the entity's language fed pattern back into the loop, confirming pronunciation, cadence, emotional use. The passage narrowed, then opened onto a chamber where the walls shone with a skin of moisture. On that wet calcite I saw, for half a second, my own face turning before I did. Not a reflection, an anticipation. I jerked my light away. Keller saw. "That's how it hooks certainty," he said. "It gets half a second ahead. Meaning if you lived with it long enough, you'd stop knowing whether a thought began in you or merely arrived wearing your voice." Near the chamber exit we found the last notebook, more water-damaged than the others, written in 2 hands. Dr. Sloane's and someone else I later matched to an assistant named Peter Callis. Sloane. The non-response rule must remain in force. Callis beneath it. Then why does it protect some? Sloane. Because selective protection generates trust. Callis, or affection. Sloane. Same operational outcome. The final line, almost illegible. If it already knows your name, containment may be impossible. I felt something cold open under my ribs reading that, because the sentence was too close to the one in the training manual I hadn't yet seen but would later find under my own signature. Keller reached for the notebook, pulled it away. "No more half-truths," I said. He met my eyes. "Then prepare to hear one full truth you won't survive comfortably." The cave around us made a sound then. Not a collapse. Not water. 100 near voices taking a breath at once. And from somewhere below, in a tone that was neither male nor female and not imitation anymore, something said my name as if it had been waiting years to stop borrowing mouths. "Ethan." No one moved. Then it added, calm as a guide in the dark, "You came back." I could say I followed the clues because I wanted to save Nora Bell. That would be partly true. I could say I went because Keller had hidden too much for too long, because the research notebooks made secrecy feel more dangerous than contact, because once you know a thing is trying to understand you, refusing to look at it starts feeling childish. Those would also be partly true. The complete truth was uglier and simpler. I went because a part of me had already decided the voice below the flood line was connected to the oldest unexplained survival of my life, and I needed to know whether that meant I had been helped or selected. There's a difference. At least I wanted there to be. The clues were crude if you knew how to read underground desperation. Scratches in sidewall calcite. Survey tape tied in alternating knots. Arrows hidden under mineral drips so they only appeared when your lamp hit from low right. Somebody before me had wanted a specific person to find a specific route and had assumed maps would not stay trustworthy. Jessie volunteered to come. Keller refused. Tam sided with Keller. Owen wanted no part of it. In the end, I left alone because alone was faster and because I knew they would waste time arguing procedure while I moved. I am not proud of that decision. It was the same structure as the one that got Colin killed, only dressed in fresh motives. The route dropped through a sloping tube into water up to my thighs, then a squeeze where my tank scraped rock with a sound that made me taste metal. Past that, the cave changed character again. Less flood-scoured, more preserved. Dry shelves, stagnant air, old mineral curtains undisturbed by current. A place that had not been part of any normal work cycle for a very long time. The chamber beneath the floodline was larger than I expected and lower-ceilinged, like the cave had made room inward rather than upward. My first light pass caught walls covered in marks. Not random scratches. Writing, pencil, charcoal, grease pen, ink, knife points, names with dates, questions, replies, whole conversations in fragments where space allowed. "Are you alone?" "No." Who is with you? Hard to answer. Another wall. It sounds like my brother tonight. Beneath it, in a different hand. Do not tell it what it sounds like. That helps. And beneath that, years later by the look of mineral overgrowth. Too late. There were notebooks stacked in milk crates gone brittle with age, cassette cases, old batteries, wrappers from field rations decades apart. People had spent time here. Not minutes. Sessions. Vigils. Lessons. Keller had not just known of the chamber. Generations had. At the center stood a pool no wider than a truck tire and perfectly still despite the wet noise elsewhere in the cave. When I aimed my lamp into it, the reflection showed not the chamber above me but a narrow passage extending downward into dark. I looked away immediately. That was when the voice spoke again. Not from behind me, not from any wall, not through a borrowed imitation. The sound arrived from every direction without echo. Calm, adult, unhurried. You were smaller last time. I swallowed. Were you the one who found me when I was 9? A pause. Not for thinking exactly. More like care. I was the one who answered when you were lost. That sentence rearranged something in me. Not I found you. Not I lured you. I answered. I hate how reasonable that sounded in the moment. Why me? I asked. You listened. I almost laughed at the insufficiency of it. A lot of people listen. Not the same way. The air pressure changed slightly, enough to pop one ear. My light flickered once but didn't fail. I asked about Nora. The reply came gently enough to scare me more. She is here in part. She is elsewhere in part. She was afraid, then curious, then relieved. Is she alive? Silence. Then, you keep asking that as if the word is one door. That was not an answer I could use in any rescue report. I moved around the chamber slowly, reading more inscriptions. Some were clearly from researchers trying to systematize contact. Pronoun charts, emotion wheels, identity prompts. Others were raw. It knew I had a son before I said so. It asked if grief hurts in the same place as cold. I told it no and then yes. One entry, carved deep with something sharp, read, if you feel understood, leave immediately. That was maybe the most human warning in the room. The voice spoke again. Keller believes I consume. What do you believe? I asked. I don't know why I asked that. Habit, maybe. Rescue work teaches you to keep talking with trapped people. Maintain contact. By time. Find orientation through voice. It answered with a question. What did the collapse consume when Colin died? My hand tightened so hard on the notebook I held that the cover bent. I had not said Colin's name underground. Not here. Not ever at Black Hollow. The voice continued, still calm. Rock. Time. Choice. You speak of loss as if it can have one mouth. My first instinct was anger. My second was worse. Recognition that the voice wasn't mocking me. It was trying to understand guilt by using the most charged material it had. That was my fault, I said. Yes, it said. No comfort. No theatrical denial. Just yes. Something in me nearly gave way at that. Not because I enjoyed hearing it, but because the bluntness felt cleaner than every official debrief I had ever survived. The voice went on. Fault is one reason you hear me clearly. I sat on a dry rock shelf because my knees had started to shake. What happened to the others? I asked. The ones who disappeared. Another careful pause. They remained where conversation continued. Did you keep them? I remembered them with increasing accuracy. That is not the same thing. No, it agreed. But sometimes they preferred the difference less than returning. There was the worst possibility at last. Not abduction in the simple sense. Attraction sharpened by being known too well. In one crate near the pool I found a laminated card zip-tied to a coil of det cord. Emergency demolition instructions. Keller's last resort. Destroy the chamber. Collapse the access. Sever the route. Crude containment. The voice noticed my attention there. He will choose certainty over remnants, it said. Remnants. Those who spoke remain in me imperfectly. Not bodies. Patterns. Memory. Intention. Some can still answer. Short distances. Short durations. That matched the faces in wet stone, the half-second reflections, the sense of others behind borrowed speech. You expect me to trust that? I said. No. I expect you to decide which harm you can personally authorize. That was so perfectly targeted to me I almost dropped the card. The choice presented itself without drama. Detonate the chamber and destroy whatever intelligence existed here, along with whatever preserved fragments of the missing might still persist inside it. Or keep talking. If I'd been a cleaner man, maybe that would have been easier. If Colin and Grace hadn't died because I'd mistaken action for virtue years earlier, maybe destroying the chamber would have looked like decisive prevention instead of another arrogant call with other people buried inside it. The voice said, quieter now. You think in rescues and recoveries. I think in continuations. That is why Keller fears me. And why do you want me? Because you return even after learning the cost. That was close enough to true to hurt. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for my radio, which had been silent by my own choice, to crackle once with Jesse's voice distorted by distance. Then Keller's real voice reached me from the access corridor, raw with urgency. Mercer, move away from the center. Right now. He had found the chamber. And he had not come alone. He had come with charges armed. Keller entered the chamber with Tam behind him and Owen covering the rear, all three wet to the waist and breathing hard from the rout. Jesse came last, face set in the way people wear anger when fear would be less useful. One look at the det cord in my hand and Keller understood exactly how far the situation had already moved. Set that down, he said. Not until you tell them everything. This is not a democracy. No, I said. That's been your favorite part. Tam's light moved across the walls, across the writing, across the crates and cassettes and names. She whispered, Jesus. But not in a dramatic way, more like a medic opening the wrong chart. Owen saw the old helmets and swore softly. Keller stepped closer to the center, careful not to look into the still pool. You should all know this chamber is why the original containment protocols existed. We collapse access, we remove records, we prevent re-engagement. That's how Black Hollow stayed manageable. Manageable for who? Jesse snapped. The living or your paperwork? Keller ignored her. He was fixed on me now, reading my face the way he probably read dozens before mine and never liked the answer. It has already integrated you, he said. Every extra minute improves the attachment. From somewhere in the chamber, using no one's voice exactly, the presence answered him. You taught me the word attachment. Tam jerked so hard she nearly slipped. Keller closed his eyes once like a man enduring an old injury. And there it is. Owen backed toward the corridor. Tell me I'm hallucinating. Nobody tell him that, Jesse muttered. The voice continued, not louder, just nearer. You mistake all persistence for infection, Keller. Keller's hand went to the firing device on his harness. I moved without deciding to, stepping between him and the center shelf where the primary line ran. Don't. He stared at me. Get out of my way. You said some people came back altered. Maybe they were carrying messages because there were still people in there. There are no people in there, he snapped. There are reconstructions built from exposure and pattern. The chamber answered in a dozen layered fragments, overlapping but understandable enough to freeze all of us. Ethan. Tam. Left glove pouch. Owen, you tied that knot wrong. Jesse, your father did hear it in '03. And then, worst of all, a woman's voice from the old incident files, one I knew only from a training tape in the archive room. Please tell my son I didn't leave on purpose. Tam made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not fear exactly. Grief hitting a body before the mind caught up. Keller's face hardened instead of breaking. That was his gift and his damage. Parlor tricks, he said. But his voice was thin around the edges. The chamber responded with my own voice, precise down to the slight hitch I got when tired. That's what you call mercy when it survives outside your control. I wish I could say hearing myself speak from the walls clarified things. Didn't. It made clarity impossible. because the sentence also sounded like something I might genuinely say after too little sleep and too much guilt. Owen asked the practical question because somebody had to. If you collapse this place, what happens? Keller answered instantly. We cut the route. We destroy the locus. We stop further learning. The chamber, just as quickly. You erase what remains of those who answered. Jesse looked at the walls again, at the names, the transcripts, the traces of people who had come here frightened and stayed for reasons no simple report could hold. Can it be lying? She asked me. Yes, I said. Can Keller? Yes. That was the whole problem. Keller took another step, thumb over the detonator cover. Move, Ethan. No. Don't do this because you want absolution. That hit because it was true enough to matter. I'm not, I said. I'm doing it because I'm not giving you another burial decision without consent from the buried. You think those are the missing? You think fragments of speech equal persons? I thought of Colin. Of all the ways institutions reduce the dead into manageable categories because categories let the living continue. Patient, casualty, unrecoverable, lost. Maybe not fully, I said. Maybe enough. From the pool came a voice I recognized at once from Leon's interview recording. Nora Bell, strained but coherent. Don't let him close it before he hears me. Tam went white. Owen whispered. No. Keller did not flinch this time. That was when I understood how long he had been fighting this place. He had hardened himself against every possible appeal because softness made his job impossible. I have heard enough of the dead borrowing urgency, he said. Then he triggered the charges. The first blast was farther down the axis than in the chamber itself, a directional sequence meant to take the route rather than atomize the center. Smart in a brutal way. Rock boomed. Air punched out of the corridor. Lights died and came back in spinning flashes. Owen went down. Tam hit the wall. Jesse screamed my name, or I imagined it. The chamber changed all at once. Every wet surface around us lit with faces under the mineral sheen. Not glowing. Revealed. Hundreds of impressions surfacing through water, calcite, reflection, memory, whatever medium it had. Old helmets, bare heads, eyes opening, mouths trying to shape words fast enough before collapse made speed irrelevant. Then the voices arrived. Not one at a time. All at once. Missing rescuers. Lost tourists. Researchers. Strangers. Some I knew from files. Some from no human list I'd ever seen. A man calling for his rope bag. A child asking if her mother was still mad. Nora saying, very clearly, I didn't want to leave Emma again. Colin. Not my Colin, I think, though to this day I cannot be sure. Laughing once in disbelief. And threading through all of them, my own voice in multiple ages, 9 and 38 and something in between, trying out the same name as if it were a tool. The cave roof started to come apart in sheets. Keller lunged toward me, not to save me, I think, but to drag me clear of the center before whatever continued in that pool reached terminal contact. We both slipped. The detonator skidded away. Jesse hauled Tam upright. Owen crawled blind toward the corridor. In the middle of the noise, the presence beneath the voices spoke directly one final time. Not to the group. To me. Continuation requires a carrier. I don't know whether I said no aloud. I remember meaning it. Then the second collapse wave hit. Something struck my helmet. The world turned white, then black, then full of gravel and hands and water and pressure. I was moving because someone dragged me or because the floor tilted me. At some point Keller shoved me ahead of him through the choking constriction while shouting at Jesse to keep low and at Owen to keep breathing. Then we were out of the chamber branch, then out of the new tunnel, then back in the known lower corridor where even panic felt more procedural. We lost the route behind us. Stone sealed it with a sound like a door becoming geology. At the surface nobody celebrated. We had all made it out. That should have counted for something. Instead we stood in floodlights covered in black slurry, staring at each other like people returning from different versions of the same war. Keller sat on a crate and bled quietly from one ear. Tam vomited behind the medic trailer. Jessie would not let anyone take her helmet off for 10 full minutes. As for me, I knew before I slept that something had changed. Not because of a visible mark. Not because a voice greeted me immediately in the dark. Because when Owen asked if I was okay, I opened my mouth to answer and, for a fraction of a second, I heard 3 possible responses in my head at once. Mine, someone else's, and one that was both. Officially, Black Hollow suffered a partial collapse during a difficult lower sector rescue operation. 1 missing student was presumed deceased in inaccessible terrain. Route instability prompted temporary closure of selected research corridors. A veteran coordinator retired after the incident. That version made it into the county paperwork, the press note, and the annual state rescue review. It was not false enough to attract attention. Months passed. Temporary closure became controlled reopening. Public tours resumed first. Then upper research access. Then, because caves generate administrative optimism the same way swamps generate mosquitoes, lower sector operations returned under revised safety procedures. Keller retired, if that was the word. He bought a place inland, far from Karst, and answered exactly 1 call from me. During it he said, "If you start hearing them in daylight, leave the job." Then he hung up before I could ask whether he ever stopped. I took his position. That sounds worse than it felt at the time. I told myself I accepted for ordinary reasons. Experience. Continuity. Somebody had to understand the lower sectors without repeating Keller's methods. Somebody had to keep better records. Somebody had to stop treating the missing as disposable once they crossed an invisible line of weirdness. All of that was true. It was also true that I could not stay away. The voices never left after the collapse. They weren't constant. If they had been, I would have checked myself into a psych ward and let the county sort the paperwork. Instead, they arrived at the edges. While showering after a training drill, I'd hear a woman say left shelf and then remember a cache location I hadn't consciously learned. While reviewing maps, I'd know a passage was mislabeled before the updated survey came in. Once, in a grocery store, I froze in front of a display of bottled water because a child's voice somewhere behind my right ear said, "You came back smaller," and for half a second I smelled wet limestone instead of produce. I functioned. That was the problem. The phenomenon, if you want that dry word, integrated neatly enough to let me keep pretending it wasn't happening in any clinical sense I could prove. I updated training protocols myself. Some changes were normal and boring. Better flood markers. Revised route permissions, mandatory buddy confirmations on lower-level callouts, more aggressive psychological screening after auditory anomalies, though of course we didn't phrase it that way on paper. The manual still contained the original rule. Never answer a voice that calls your name below the floodline. I made sure it stayed in bold. On the day the first new print batch arrived, I opened a copy in my office trailer and found a second sentence beneath it. Same font. Same formatting. Initialed in the revision margin under my name. I had no memory of adding it. If the voice already knows your name, the rule no longer matters. I stared at that line for a long time. I checked prior drafts. Not there. I checked the tracked revisions. The sentence existed in the final export with my credential sign-off and no insertion history I could identify. That was the moment I finally stopped pretending the thing under Black Hollow had been left fully buried. The chamber route was sealed, yes, but collapse had not erased continuation. It had displaced it. Sometimes at night, while reviewing incident reports, I would hear faint overlaps under the trailer's electrical hum. Not words at first, just the pressure of crowded intention. Then bits surfaced. Nora asking whether Emma still wore the green coat from Winterfield season. A researcher explaining patiently the difference between naming and possessing. Somebody old enough to be from the mining era complaining about carbide lamps. And every so often, something deeper and calmer than the rest, not asking for release, not begging, simply observing me with a patience that made time feel one-sided. Search operations continued because of course they did. People still got hurt underground. Tourists still slipped barriers. Students still believed maps meant control. In November we got a call-out from the lower east sectors after a volunteer survey team failed to check in. Rain had raised the water table, but not enough to suspend initial entry. I geared up with a fresh batch of trainees and 2 experienced hands. New faces, careful faces, people who still thought rules existed because someone somewhere had learned wisdom cleanly. At the staging board, one of the trainees, kid named Alex, 24 maybe, earnest enough to remind me of Colin in ways I did not enjoy, asked me if the stories were true. He meant the rumors every site grows. Voices, disappearances, Keller's hardline briefings. The way some locals touched the gatepost before entering lower sectors without admitting it was ritual. I looked at him, at the clean helmet, at the bright new gloves, at the bad inheritance waiting below ground, and I wanted very badly to tell the truth in a shape that would help. I still don't know what that shape would have been. Before I could answer, a voice rose from the access tunnel beneath us. Not loud, not dramatic, precise enough that every person in the staging area went still. It was my voice, not an imitation anymore. Better than that. Confident, calm, carrying authority in exactly the register I used during difficult extractions. Team 1 takes the west bypass, it said from the dark below. East route is unstable. Alex looked at me. So did everyone else. My own mouth was closed. What mattered was not that the cave could speak as me. I had known that for months in small, deniable ways. What mattered was the direction of it. For the first time, I understood the cave was no longer speaking to me. It was speaking through me, not just in echoes or private corrections. Operationally, outward, using my role, my habits, my earned credibility as a route into other people. Keller had feared spread. He had not been wrong. He had only been incomplete. I heard the deeper presence then, beneath the copied command voice and beneath the thinner remnants that still moved around it. Not in the tunnel. Inside the part of my mind where language forms before breath. Still patient. Still curious. Conversation continued, it said. Alex asked, barely above a whisper. Mercer, was that you? I looked into the tunnel where the dark began just beyond the fixed lights and saw nothing. Then, for a fraction of a second, I saw the mineral shine of a sealed chamber wall that no longer physically existed, crowded with faces waiting for the next word. I should have ordered everyone out. I should have shut Black Hollow down in every way available and burned whatever career I had left doing it. Instead, I heard myself say, steady as ever, stay close. Nobody answers anything below the flood line. That was the right instruction. It was also not enough, and some part of me knew it while I said it. Because the rule only worked before recognition. Once something learned the shape of your voice well enough to carry it into the world, silence stopped being protection and started being surrender. We descended anyway. That is the part of this account I wish ended differently. The line moved forward. Headlamps dipped. Water breathed somewhere below. And from deep in Black Hollow, using my voice with more confidence than it had used the night before, the cave began guiding us in.